Hello, everybody. Welcome to our close reading in the Ecology of Freedom by Mori Bookchin. We are continuing in episode 3, The Emergence of Hierarchies. We are on page 135 in the printed version. As always, join us on Discord if you want to join this live. And let's get into it. How easily can we slip into a conventional historical stance can be seen from recent fervent controversies around the meaning given to the concept of scarcity. It has become rather fashionable to describe scarcity simply as a function of needs, so that the fewer our needs and the smaller our toolkit, the more abundant, even affluent nature becomes. In its divine simplicity, this contention removes the need to strike a balance between humanity's obvious potentialities for producing a rich literary tradition, science, a sense of place, and a broad concept of shared humanity on the one side, and on the other, the limits that an oral tradition, magic, a nomadic way of life, and a parochial sense of fulcrum, folkdom, based on kinship, place on these potentialities. Let me read this again. I'm not sure that I fully grasped it. How easily we can slip into a conventional historical stance can be seen from recent fervent controversies around the meaning given to the concept of scarcity. It has become rather fashionable to describe scarcity simply as a function of needs, so that the fewer our needs and the smaller our toolkit, the more abundant, even affluent nature becomes. What does he mean by that? Fewer our needs and the smaller our toolkit, the more abundant, even affluent nature becomes. Do you guys understand what he means by this?
Yeah, I think he's saying that it's fashionable right now to decrease our human needs in order to feel like nature is abundant and affluent. So we have to cut back is basically individually.
Yeah, like tightening the belt and all of these kind of this kind of politics of how do you call it? The word escaped me. Politics of blacked out. But yeah, basically all of these like legislators, even like on the neoliberal side, who are like moving towards tightening the belt rather than addressing the problems.
Instead of turning the AC down.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. In its divine simplicity, this connotation removes the need to strike a balance between humanity's obvious potentialities for producing a rich literary tradition, science, a sense of place, and a broad concept of shared humanity on the one side, and on the other, the limits that an oral tradition, magic, a nomadic way of life, and a parochial sense of fulcrum, folkdom, based on kinship, place on these potentialities. Actually, by emphasizing material affluence per se, in terms of needs and resources, this functional approach to scarcity subtly capitulates to the very economic stance it is meant to correct. It merely recreates from a hunter-gatherer viewpoint a calculus of resources and wants that a bourgeoisie viewpoint imparts on a social theory during the last century. At the risk of an excursus, which may try the reader patience, I would like to discuss the issue of scarcity in somewhat general terms, and the return to my more concrete account of the emergence of hierarchy. Scarcity is not merely a functional phenomenon that can be described primarily in terms of needs or wants. Obviously, without a sufficiency in the means of life, life itself is impossible, and without a certain excess in these means, life is degraded to a cruel struggle for survival, irrespective of the level of needs. Leisure time, under these conditions, is not free time that fosters intellectual advances beyond the magical, artistic, and mythopoetic. To a large extent, the time of a community on the edge of survival is sufficient time. It is a time when hunger is the all-encompassing fear that persistently lives with the community. A time when the diminution of hunger is the community's constant preoccupation. Clearly, a balance must be struck between a sufficiency of the means of life, a relative freedom of time to fulfill one's abilities on the most advanced level of human achievements, and ultimately, a degree of self-consciousness, complementarity, and reciprocity that can be called truly human in full recognition of humanity's potentialities. Not only the functional dictates of needs and wants, but also a concept of human beings as more than thinking animals, to use Paul Shepard's expression, must be introduced to define what we mean by scarcity. These distinctions raise a second and perhaps more complex problem. Scarcity can not only impair human survival, but also impede the actualization of human potentiality. Hence, scarcity can be defined in terms of its biological impact and also its cultural consequences. There is a point at which society begins to intervene in the formation of needs to produce a very special type of scarcity. Socially induced scarcity that expresses social contradictions. Such scarcity may occur even when technical developments seem to render material scarcity completely unwarranted. Let me emphasize that I am not referring here to the more exotic wants that social development may turn into needs. A society that has enlarged the cultural goals of human life may generate material scarcity even when the technical conditions exist for achieving outright superfluity in the means of life. The issue of scarcity is not merely a matter of quantity or even of kind. It can also be socially contradictory hypothetization of needs as such. Just as capitalism leads to production for the sake of production, so too it leads to consumption for the sake of consumption. The great bourgeoisie maxim, grow or die, has its counterpart in buy or die. And just as the production of commodities is no longer related to their function as use value, going back to the usury concept of organic societies that we spoke about before, as objects of real utility, so wants are no longer related to humanity's sense of its real needs. So both production and consumption are detached from the real needs, from the usury. Both commodities and needs require a blind life of their own. They assume a fetishized form, an irrational dimension that seems to determine the destiny of the people who produce and consume them. Marx's famous notion of the fetishization of commodities finds its parallel in a fetishization of needs. Production and consumption, in effect, acquire superhuman qualities that are no longer related to technical development and the subject's rational control of the conditions of existence. They are governed instead by an ubiquitous market, a universal competition not only between commodities but also between the creation of needs, a competition that removes commodities that needs from rational cognition and personal control. Note, here I cannot resist Karl Polanyi's priceless observation. Rational action as such is the relating of ends to means. Economic rationality specifically assumes means to be scarce. But human societies involves more than that. What should be the end of man, and how should we choose this means? Economic rationalism, in the strict sense, has no answer to these questions, for they imply motivations and valuations of a moral and practical order that go beyond the logically irresistible, but otherwise empty exhortation to be economical. Going back to the text, needs, in effect, become a force of production, not a subjective force. They become blind in the same sense that the production of commodities become blind. Orchestrated by forces that are external to the subject, they exist beyond its control, like the production of the very commodities that are means to satisfy them. The autonomy of needs, as we shall see, is developed at the expense of the autonomy of the subject. It reveals a fatal flaw in subjectivity itself, in the autonomy and spontaneity of the individual to control the conditions of his or her own life. Break the grip of the fetishization of needs, to dispel it, is to recover the freedom of choice, a project that is tied to the freedom of the self to choose. The words freedom and choice must be emphasized. They exist conjointly and are tied to the ideal of the autonomous individual who is possible only in a free society. Although a hunter-gatherer community may be free from the needs that belliger us, it must still answer to very strict material imperatives. Such freedom as it has is the product not of choice, but of limited means of life. What makes it free are the very limitations of its toolkit, not an expensive knowledge of the material world. In a truly free society, however, needs would be formed by consciousness and by choice, not simply by environment and toolkits. The affluence of a free society would be transformed from a wealth of things into a wealth of culture and individual creativity. Hence, wants would be depend not only on technological developments, but also on the cultural context in which it is formed. Nature's stinginess and technology's level of development would be important, but only as secondary factors in defining scarcity and need. The problem of needs and scarcity, in short, must be seen as a problem of selectivity, of choice. A world in which needs compete with needs just as commodities compete with commodities is the warped realm of the fetishized, limitless world of consumption. This world of limitless needs has been developed by the immense armamentarium of advertising, the mass media, and the grotesque trivialization of daily life, with its steady disengagement of the individual from any authentic contact with history. Although choice presupposes sufficiency in the means of life, it does not imply the existence of a mindless abundance of goods and smothers the individual's capacity to select use value rationally, to define his or her needs in terms of qualitative, ecological, humanistic, indeed philosophical criteria. Rational choice presupposes not only a sufficiency in the means of life with minimal labor to acquire them, it presupposes above all a rational society. Freedom from scarcity or post-scarcity must be seen in this light if it is to have any liberatory meaning. The concept presupposes that individuals have the mental possibility of choosing what they need, not only a sufficiency of available goods from which to choose, but a transformation of work both qualitatively and quantitatively. But none of these achievements is adequate to the idea of post-scarcity if the individual does not have the autonomy or insight and wisdom to choose rationally. Consumerism and mere abundance are mindless. Choice is vitiated by the association of needs with consumption for the sake of consumption, with the use of advertising and the mass media to render the acquisition of goods an imperative to make need into necessity, devoid of rational judgment. What is ultimately at stake for the individual whose needs are rational is the achievement of an autonomous personality and selfhood. Just as work, to use Marx's concept, defines the subject identity and provides it with a sense of the ability to transform or alter reality, so needs, too, define the subject's rationality and provide it with a capacity to transform and alter the nature of the goods produced by work. That's an interesting one. Just as work, to use Marx's concepts, defines the subject's identity and provides it with a sense of ability to transform or alter reality, so needs, too, define the subject's rationality and provide it with the capacity to transform and alter the nature of the goods produced by work. In both cases, the subject is obliged to form judgments that reflect the extent to which it is rational or irrational, free and autonomous, or under the sway of forces beyond its control. Post-scarcity presupposes the former, consumerism the latter. Post-scarcity presupposes the former, judgments that reflect the extent to which it is rational and irrational, and consumerism the latter, free and autonomous or under the sway of forces beyond its control. If the object of capitalism or socialism is to increase needs, the object of anarchism is to increase choice. Preach! However much the consumer is deluded into the belief that he or she is choosing freely, the consumer is heteronymous, under the sway of a controversial necessity. The free subject, by contrast, is autonomous and spontaneously fulfills his or her rationally conceived wants. In summary, it is not in the diminution or expansion of needs that the true history of needs is written. Rather, it is in the selection of needs as a function of the free and the spontaneous development of the subject that needs become qualitative and rational. Needs are inseparable from the subjectivity of the needer and the context in which his or her personality is formed. The autonomy that is given to use value in the formation of needs leaves out the personal quality, human powers, and intellectual coherence of their users. It is not industrial productivity that creates mutilated use value, but social irrationality that creates mutilated users. Scarcity does not mean the same thing when applied to a savage, peasant, slave, serf, artisan, or proletarian, any more than it means the same thing when it applies to a chieftain, lord, master, noble, guildmaster, or merchant. The material needs of a savage, peasant, slave, serf, artisan, and proletarian are not so decisively different from each other. But the most important difference that do arise derive from the fact that their individual definitions of scarcity have changed significantly as a result of differences between needs structures. Often the needs of these opposed classes are generated by their ruling class counterparts. The history of white bread in the anthropology of needs, for example, is a metaphor for the extent to which tastes associated with gentility, not with physical well-being and survival, are turned into the needs of the lowly as compellingly in the fetishism of needs as the very means of survival. Similarly, the ascetic rejection by the lowly of the ruler's needs has functioned as a compensation role in imparting to the oppressed a lofty sense of moral and cultural superiority over their betters. In both cases, the fetishism of needs has impeded humanity in using its techniques rationally and selecting its needs consciously. Our own skewed concept of scarcity and needs are even more compelling evidence of this fetishism. Until comparatively recent times, needs retained some degree of contact with material reality and were tempered by some degree of rationality. For all the cultural differences that surrounded the concept of scarcity and needs in the past, their fetishization was almost minimal by comparison with our own times. But with the emergence of a complete market society, the ideal of both limitless production and limitless needs becomes thoroughly mystified. No less by a socialist ideologues than by their bourgeoisie counterparts. The restraints that Greek social theorists like Aristotle tried to place on the markets, however much they were honored in the breach, were completely removed, and objects to use value began to infiltrate the lofty human goals that society has elaborated from the days of their conception in the polis. The ideals of the past, in effect, had become so thoroughly bewitched by things that they were soon to become things rather than ideals. Honor, today, is more important as a credit rating than a sense of moral probity. Personality is the sum of one's possessions and holdings rather than a sense of self-awareness and self-cultivation. One can continue this list of contrasts indefinitely. Having demolished all the ethical and moral limits that once kept it in hand, market society, in turn, has demolished almost every historic relationship between nature, techniques, and material well-being. No longer is nature's stinginess a factor in explaining scarcity, nor is scarcity conceived as a function of technical development that explains the creation of satisfaction of needs. Both the culture and the technique of modern capitalism have united to produce crises, not of scarcity, but of abundance, or at least the expectation of abundance. All chit-chat about diminishing resources aside, Western society may accept the reality of economic crisis, inflation, and underemployment, and popular credulity has not rejected the myth of a stingy nature that is running out of raw materials and energy resources. abundance, all the more because it is being denied for structural economic reasons rather than natural ones, still orchestrates the popular culture of present-day society. To mix solid Victorian metaphors with contemporary ones, if savage, as to perform heroic technical feats to extricate themselves from the claw and fang world of the jungle and arrive at the sense of their humanity, then modern consumers of market society will have to perform equally heroic ethical feats to extricate themselves from the shopping malls and recover their own sense of humanity. To disembed themselves from the shopping mall, they may require more powerful agents than ethics. It may well require superfluity of goods so immense in quantity that the prevailing fetishism of needs will have to be dispelled on its own terms. Hence, the ethical limits that were so redolent with meaning from Hellenic times onwards may be inadequate today. We have arrived at a point in history's account of needs where the very capacity to select needs, which freedom, scarcity was expected to create, has been subverted by a strictly appetitive sensibility. Society may well have to be overindulged to recover its capacity for selectivity. Interesting. To lecture society about its insatiable appetite, as our resource-conscious environmentalists are wont to do, is precisely what the modern consumer is not prepared to hear. And so impoverished society with contrived shortages, economic dislocations, and material deprivation is certain to shift the mystification of needs over to a more sinister social chaos, ethos, mystification of scarcity. This ethos, already crystallized into the lifeboat ethics, triage, and a new bourgeoisie imagery of claw and fang called survivalism, marks the first step towards ecofascism. Ooh, that was a fantastic one.
Yeah, this is very dense. I don't think I've read anything in quite a while where there are so many words that I have never heard before.
I'm reading the Losing Gatari right now, so I'm used to not understanding anything.
Yeah.
But if I understand it correctly, he's basically elaborating that what we want to speak about is not the very notion of scarcity or abundance, but how our very conception of such things are very much a product of our environment. So how both the sense of needs and the sense of consumption, work and consumption, have become kind of completely detached from their material realities and became these kind of ambiguous notions of consumption and work. Consumption for the sake of consumption, work for the sake of capital. What I found really, really interesting is a lot of things, but I think the last part that he's talking about, like, talking with modern society or people in modern society about, tightening the belt or maybe not consuming as much is kind of like missing the point and is ineffective, but also like the path to ecofascism.
Yeah.
And I think it makes a lot of sense in some other critique that I saw on like the kind of political reformist movements that always, at the face of crisis that is inevitable under our current economic structures, opt to, go into these like scarcity, tightening the belt kind of policies. that, as he said, just serve to the mystification of scarcity even further into survivalism, and marks the first step into ecofascism, which makes so much sense considering where we're at right now politically. What else did you guys extricate from this really long and dense?
I just popped in late, but it hit me in the stomach, to be honest. It's kind of everything we're thinking about. And this term, ecofascism, it's where we're at. Because if there's no ethical framework, no social justice, no notion of social justice, we're just continuously regurgitating the same eco-racism, eco-sexism, eco-ableism. It's just cannibalistic, and self-perpetuating, self-satisfied. It's terrifying. And we're part of it. We're in the system benefiting from eco-fascistic systems,
Yeah, because it's our ability to make sense and rationally think about what needs and what the fulfillment of these needs are that is being impaired by the systems that we are part of. I mean, he says something really, another thing that I'm kind of remembered and wanted to mark. He says a few pages before, in both cases, maybe I'll start a little bit before. What is ultimately at stake for the individual whose needs are rational is the achievement of an autonomous personality and selfhood. Just as work, to use Marx's concept, defines the subject's identity and provides it with a sense of ability to transform or alter reality. In other words, like Marx's notion of work versus labor. When work is this kind of inherent fundamental individuation through which we exert and assert our individuality and our selfhood in the world as a subject, the ability to transform and alter reality, so as needs define the subject's rationality and provide it with a capacity to transform and alter the nature of the goods produced by work. So there is also the sense of needs in a more materially grounded, in a more ecologically grounded way, which is the very way in which an individual within a society define their rationality and how they interact with the world, right? And what is consumed by, what is produced by work. In both cases, the subject is obliged to form judgments that reflect the extent to which it is rational or irrational, free and autonomous, or under the sway of forces beyond its control. Post-scarcity presupposes the former, an individual that is either rational or irrational. Consumerism, the latter, someone who is under the sway of forces beyond its control or not. And then this is the sentence that is like, fuck yeah. If the object of capitalism or socialism is to increase needs, the object of anarchism is to increase choice. That's a good one.
Well, Yuval, you know what I think about anarcho-fascists, though, don't you?
What do you think about?
I mean, anarcho-fascism. We're talking about consumers versus makers, but at the end of the day, nobody wants to be a maker. They'd rather buy their clothes in H&M and have a brown woman making their clothes. We're locked in the logic of industrialization. We can't get out of it because we don't want to be makers. We don't want to be disassociated our individuality. We don't want to disassociate our individuality from being consumers.
I want to.
Yeah, I want to. I think he's kind of, I mean, I don't know. This is very dense for me, and I keep trying to reread it and pay attention to you guys at the same time, so it's difficult to juggle. But I think what he's saying is just exactly kind of what you're saying, that people don't want to be makers anymore, and that not wanting to be makers is shaped by, you know, our worldview basically, and we think that that's freedom, but we don't know what it how fulfilling it is to say make your own clothes, and
Yeah,
how much more enjoyable that is, and how much more, I guess, human it is. All of the little needs that humans have to like produce something that fits them well, the self-esteem it provides for you, the fulfillment, it's like it's all been so cheapened, and we've been
exactly.
told that that's not what we want. But
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, remember that we are like, to contextualize all of this, we are in the episode of the emergence of hierarchy. So we are on a journey to explore how hierarchy emerged. And I think here he's elaborating how our conceptions of needs and consumption is very much at the kind of part of the process of how hierarchy has been created. I think it's in some parts he's starting to talk about like the needs, how they are defined by the kind of the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. And I think if I understand this correctly, he's kind of trying to go beyond Marx, who saw in kind of material dialectical materialism in general, that think about historical processes or events as they occur as a result of contradictions, inherent class contradictions. And it goes beyond that. And I think this is something that, or at least tries to, or starts to elaborate something that goes even beyond that, which is not only how the contradictions between the needs of the bourgeoisie and the ruling class and the needs of the proletariat are producing social rupture and social and historical events, but also the very material realities that encapsulates all of us, both the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and in a way kind of dissolving this sense of contradiction between them, which is me very profound, because there is really one class and we are all in it. Like people who are relatively rich, let's say people who have, I don't know, a few millions, they may feel they are represented by capitalism and the current economical systems, but they are much, much, much closer statistically and mathematically and realistically to be homeless than they are to be a billionaire. Ultimately, there is only a ruling class and then the rest of us, right? And the needs, our conceptions of, at least this is what I'm seeing kind of explicitly and implicitly with what he's saying here, that the way that our material conditions and the systems that we are in produce our sense of what is of what needs are and what consumption is transcends this kind of class contradiction, because the kind of superfluity of bourgeoisie society, let's think about, like, I don't know, celebrities, right? Like, they are just cosplaying being rich. They are not actually wealthy. They are one step away from gambling their money away or having some kind of being hacked or whatever, and they are like back to zero, right? And it happened multiple times. Versus ruling class, which is people who have unimaginable amount of wealth, and it's not about money anymore. You know, they don't have income. They don't spend money in the day to day. People don't understand this. Billionaires spend debt, not money. They have so much assets, so much actual wealth that they can buy whatever they want with infinite credit. They don't need money anymore, right? And so I think this is a lot of what he's talking about here. It's like if we want to start thinking about this, it's beyond going between the binary of abundance versus scarcity, but rather exploring the very ways in which we come to conceptualize abundance and scarcity as ambiguous notions, completely detached from material needs, from material reality, that we need to start exploring, or we need to elaborate. That makes sense. That's what I'm generally getting from what he's saying here.
But there's also kind of a ratio when I totally understand what you're saying. And in a ecological sense, this is true, that we're all being destroyed by climate collapse. And there's billionaires who should be paying tax, which could solve, a ridiculous amount of problems. But there's a kind of reductionism in that by not acknowledging the differences within the world now, between racial differences, sexism, ableism. I mean, we talk about bourgeoisie. What is that? But it's the ultimate outsourcing of discomfort. It's nothing to do with needs and desires, but we're locked in this othering of everything bad is not us, and yet we don't want to work in a care home, taking care of our elderly. We don't want to clean toilets. This is like something has to shift. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
I think what they're saying has to shift is that want, is knowing what
Yeah.
our wants. Like you keep saying, like we don't want to be makers, we don't want to work in a care home taking care of our elderly. I took care of my father with dementia for many years and my mother, and it, I feel bad for my sister who missed out on that opportunity because it was so fulfilling to have that
I think that we
interaction.
want to be makers. We want to be
Yeah.
makers at an essential level because this is how we produce subjectivity. And this is how capitalist society creates this infinitely, exponentially amplifying alienation because we are so detached from this kind of process of producing individuation.
It grounds
You know?
us in our humanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those things, the creativity of expressed and being able to make your own clothes, like the love that is given and received in caring for an elderly person, like all of those things we're missing out on, and we think we have, our society conceptualizes them as chores and negative, like things that pull away from it, conceptualizes them as a loss of freedom, but it's those responsibilities are fulfilling, I guess. I don't know how to say it.
I totally agree, Lily, as someone who like makes things and has done like deep and holy care work, right? Like of caring for a beloved family member like through their death process, right? Like I think a lot of this is like creating this binary of like there's leisure and then there's labor, there's leisure and there's work. And that one is better than the other and that you want more of one rather than the other, when in truth there's a lot of meaning in the things that we do that are both of those things. And when we're hoarding, when like we have this, I think that there's this like lie that capitalism kind of sells us, that we want, like, people want more leisure, but then are people really happier with being able to go to H&M and like buy a $10 t-shirt that maybe reflects their aesthetic, but was made by someone under unfair wages halfway across the world? I do really think that it is a lie, right? And then if you experience the joy of making something beautiful that really reflects you, then you know how much time that it takes and how much care that it takes. And like having the desire to then mend it if it breaks or tears. Right. If like the truth of that, like I think that this is a huge reason why there is such a fear of death in Western culture, because like people just don't have an appreciation for like we don't get out of this alive, and that caring for people through these like spaces of birth and death and growth, there is very little that is more meaningful. And yet we like I think a piece of this is just the value of time, right?
Mhm.
It would take a lot of time to do all of the care work, or to carry the care work of, you know, caring for my children or my elderly relatives. And I need to use that work in order to, I need to use that time in order to work, to make wages, to put food on my table, right? Like our whole economy is sort of like based on this division between like what is paid work, what's valuable work that will get you the basics for survival, you know, versus what is work that we can outsource and pay someone um else to do, either you know, in racialized capitalism, like outsourcing care work largely like which has to be local, right? To largely black and brown, mostly women, locally, or, you know, taking the work of making the things that we need and outsourcing them to distant places where quote unquote like local cost of living means that we can pay lower wages. Well, what determined that quote unquote lower cost of living apart from like our system of global capitalism, right? Like, I don't know. That was a bit of a rant, but
No, exactly. Exactly.
I think when you said we deem labor as bad and leisure as good, and that dichotomy, that's where I think that harm comes, because we don't then we don't value the things that take our labor, that are fulfilling and build us and ground us in our humanity. And we see, you know, doing anything that is difficult, that requires mental energy, physical energy, and skills, as being, you know, something that to avoid. Yeah. And when anyone who has, you know, experienced being a human knows that it's like achieving something, reaching a, you know, reaching a goal that was difficult to reach is what builds you as a person and what fulfills you, right? And we're denying, I mean, with like Chat GPT, with everything, we're denying people the opportunity to like build and ground themselves in their humanity and build their self-esteem, really.
Yeah. Apropos that, you know, working through difficult literature, I think, is one kind of lost art in many ways, you know, in a culture of quick consumption of simplified and oversimplified ideas, where you go to YouTube and everyone is a philosopher, a quasi philosopher, who sometimes, without even reading and engaging with the work of the people they're talking about, you know, kind of give you all this kind of nugget size bite. And then it's very rare to see people who actually see it for years with a work of art as literature and really engage with it. And, you know, like even what we are doing right now, this book is not the most difficult book I've read. It's pretty, but it's still it's a dense one, and there is a place for reflection and depth. And I think this is, to me, this is a very satisfying labor. You know, that we are not getting paid for, and we don't see immediate results in a form of capital or consumption, but nevertheless it's a very, it's a process that is fundamental to our individuation, to our becoming, right? Yeah.
It's a luxury.
Also, yeah.
One thing that caught my eye was this line: often the needs of the oppressed class are generated by their ruling class counterparts. So this ability to control the needs blinds us or limits us in the choices we make. So when we're talking about this idea of what is labor or what is leisure, those are that are being limited by the ruling class.
Yeah, and it's dictated to both so-called bourgeoisie and so-called proletariat, right? Like the only difference is relative levels of superfluity and amounts of money and privilege and racial stuff, right? But at the end of the day, either way, we are detached from need and consumption that are based in material conditions that are real, Yeah.
This is one of those sections that I'm definitely going to completely reread after this because there's just so much
Yeah.
to think
Yeah,
about.
I try to read before we get into the readings, just to first of all have a more fluidity in reading it, but also it's a bit dense, but I like it. What else are we getting out of here? There were some other things that I wanted to kind of. There's the fetishization aspect that keeps repeating itself. That I don't think we touched. Like how needs are fetishized. What do you think he means by that?
Think
Advertising.
that our needs become our sole focus, like shopping has become a hobby and a kind of like time. It's kind of like a social. I don't even know how to describe.
Auntie,
But
you started saying something? Oh, sorry. Go on.
oh yeah, go ahead. I'll stop.
I mean, either of you. I want to hear both of you.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, I guess what I was trying to say is that our needs, the way we fetishize our needs, it is like what we it becomes our humanity. It becomes our sole reason for living and our sole focus in our day, acquiring things, consumption. It becomes what we identify ourselves as consumers, right?
And I'm thinking about fetish. I think about a fixation, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot about like, so I'm a botanist and ecologist, and I love plants. I grew up, before I became a botanist, like kind of collecting plants. And then as I matured, I realized how this mindset of collection and collecting is harmful to the species that I love so much. But I've been taught that my only way of expressing love and appreciation for this organism is to possess it, to own it, and to collect it. And how harmful that is, and how shallow and really meaningless and because I'm losing the entire context of what created this species, right? When I pull it out of its habitat and pull it out of the ecological role that it plays in its niche. And I'm not really even fully appreciating it. I'm just focused solely mostly on the aesthetics of it. And so, I've tried to talk about that in the in my like sphere of plant people, but people become so defensive because that is how they identify themselves as collectors, and that is how that is the only way they know to express love and appreciation for these organisms is by collecting and possessing them. And it's very difficult to change that or even approach that.
Yeah, that's a fascinating perspective, and I love that you brought up this notion of ownership in Hill as part of the fetishization, because it's a fetish, it's a fixation.
Mm-hmm.
And he did kind of mention that, and I mentioned briefly as we were reading that I think it's connected to previously when he defined the alternative to ownership in organic societies, which were usurpacts, things based on use, right? And similarly, we have this like we have the same thing. Like everybody has to own their own thing. We can't like sharing a bus, sharing a train, even sharing a car, sharing things like all of this kind of sharing economy is completely lost because everybody needs to, in a fetishized way, to own the thing. And that's the kind of obstruction around consumerism. So yeah, I love that you mentioned that. I think it's very connected to what he's talking about here.
And there's definitely a focus on scarcity too, because the rarer a plant, the more highly sought after it is. And so it's becomes this like it's just very weird. It's very weird. And it's so sad too, because it's always the people that really love plants, but they think they love them, but if you really love something, don't you, then you actually appreciate all acts, you appreciate the role it plays and what the context and environment that shaped it and how it works there and all the things it does. It's just a very shallow, unfulfilling way of actually showing love and appreciation. And I think that's why they keep collecting and keep collecting, because it's never, that void is never really satisfied or fulfilled.
100%.
Kind of reminds, for some reason, like the Dutch like tulip like obsession kind of popped into my head, right? Or like anything that can become a bubble that bursts. Like clearly the need of whatever that item that is subject to like the bubble that then bursts, like there is an artificiality to the need, right? That's being created. There's like some sort of urgency that is the driver of like this spell that people come under in order to like drive this irrational and unsustainable like escalation of a quote unquote need.
Yeah. And that freedom, true freedom, is not the freedom to collect whatever you want, but the freedom from that obsession to collect.
I'm thinking about fetish also in the sexual erotic context because everything is sexual. If there is one thing that Freud was right about, although he kind of kept it stuck in the daddy, mommy, and me thing, but everything is sexing, right? Like everything is erotic, aliveness, and desire, and it plays a part in all of this. So fetishizing as well is this kind of reduction of the entire vastness of lovemaking the act of sexuality as a creative act of production into a fetish of a thing, like a body part, a body as an object. It kind of eliminates and detaches from the depth and the vastness of its relational material realities. Similar obsession.
When you say this fetish, and I have a hard time saying that word, immediately brings to mind this idea of control, of ownership, of just dominating over it. And I think there's something just really important there to kind of reflect what are ways of countering that, I guess.
Well, talking about that, I was thinking to finish us off with reading again the last piece, because I think this is where he's starting to point towards just that. I just wanted to ask before if there is anyone wanted to say anything else.
I just wanted to tell Lily that I was in Carl Linnaeus's house today, thinking about exactly what you said and what Franco just said, that this is the core of colonialism. And it's not an accident that the categorization was evolving with colonialism. It's the same thing, you know? So we see it in the whole way plants were collected, animals were collected and killed, transported back to Europe to be categorized, when these things had names before. You know, a lot of the plants coming from China, for example, were already being collected and named, but the naming wasn't taken back with the items. So they were renamed, reappropriated. And this is constantly happening.
Yeah. All right. With your permission, let me finish us off reading again the last part of our reading today, because I feel like it can point us to some interesting directions. To disembed themselves from the shopping mall, they may require more powerful agents than ethics. They may well require a superfluity of goods so immense in quantity that the prevailing fetishism of needs will have to be dispelled on its own terms. Hence, the ethical limits that were so redolent with meaning from Hellenic times onwards may be inadequate today. We have arrived at a point in history's account of needs where the very capacity to select needs, which freedom from material scarcity was expected to create, has been subverted by a strictly appetitive sensibility. Society may well have to be overindulged to recover its capacity for selectivity. To lecture society about its insatiable appetites, as our resource-conscious environmentalists are wont to do, is precisely what the modern consumer is not prepared to hear. And to impoverish society with contrived shortages, economic dislocations, and material deprivation is certain to shift the mystification of needs over to a more sinister social ethos, the mystification of scarcity. This ethos already crystallized into the lifeboat ethics, triage, and a new bourgeoisie imagery of a claw and fang called survivalism, marks the first step towards ecofascism. Basically, if I understand this correctly, is the need to address the material realities themselves, to create real, material abundance, almost an overindulgence that kind of, I wonder what he means by that. Like, this is such an interesting. What I do understand is that to lecture society about our insatiable appetites is kind of counterproductive, because first of all, people are not ready to hear this, and also because those among us who are impoverished, who live shortages, economic dislocations, and material deprivations, having such lecturing them about insatiable appetites could create, or rather in both cases, can start creating the first steps towards ecofascism.
He means by the mystification of needs and the mystification of scarcity.
I think that it means, like, mystification is usually the kind of detachment from material realities. I think in this case.
Yeah. So we don't really, what he's saying, we making it so that we don't really understand needs.
Yeah. So like you tell people who are already impoverished about how insatiable our consumerism as a society is, without addressing the impoverishment and creating material conditions that allow for such notions of consumerism to subside on themselves, right? Like, what are the material conditions that created such notions of detachment from actual consumption for pleasure, for joy, for communal connection, and created instead consumption for the sake of consumption? It's material conditions that created that. That's what and then I think is like kind of implicitly, when he's mentioning the lifeboat ethic and triage, he's talking about this kind of the reformists, the political class that's faced with the inevitable, kind of destruction and inevitable kind of downturn of the economic structure that comes every once in a while, preach tightening the belt instead of restructuring the whole thing, parting ways with this insane economic structure altogether, right? It's like right now in the United States, there is this, like, I think even Trump himself, but even people in his around him, kind of like, talking to the large majority of people who voted him into power, which are poor people, and saying, oh, it might get more difficult as a result of all of these policies, but then it's going to get better, right? And there is always this kind of notion of, like, you are going to feel the weight of this delusional, neurotic, insane economy that we are applying. But it's okay, because, and this is the mystification of scarcity, right? Like, instead of, you are poor because fucking this, instead it has to be mystified, because otherwise people will not feel represented by the systems, right? Like, why would a poor person from the Appalachia would feel represented by a billionaire with a bunch of billionaire friends and their policies? The only way that can happen is through mystification, is by creating the illusion that they can one day become billionaire and they can find themselves represented in those kind of right? It's not really, none of these politicians on every side of the spectrum is talking about actual needs. I think this is what he means by mystification. It's an obstruction. Like, nobody is actually talking about, okay, what are we going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 to meet everybody's needs? Which first will be to tax all the billionaires and make it impossible to be a billionaire in the first place. Period. That's it. That's demystification, material reality that is necessary to happen in order to reimagine our relationship with scarcity and consumption. No?
And we don't question that we spend trillions of dollars on a war machine.
Yeah.
And yet we still have to keep tightening our belts because we've got to get by, and this is just how it is.
Exactly. I think this is what he means by like, what we actually need is create such superfluous abundance, such overindulgence, which we can. Like, we can, and we can do that without destroying the planet. That's the fucking craziest thing.
Yeah, there's this section of 1984, the like book within a book part where he talks about the point of war is, and the war machine is to essentially waste resources in order to not raise the living standards of the working class, or else they don't work anymore. And they're not easily controlled. And so using all these resources to even just make bombs, even if we don't expend them, is just a way to continue the hierarchy, to continue to entrench the hierarchy.
Exactly.
I think it's also not stuff, though. I think when he's talking about fetishization, it's coming from when needs are attached to identity, and this happened very consciously in the 80s when advertising shifted from telling you the benefits of a product to selling in a lifestyle. So and that's been amplified until you have, if you replace fetishization with weaponization, then you can kind of see clearly what is happening, It's like nobody was worried about trans people using women's toilets until very recently, right? So there's like, you women have been fighting for your autonomy and your safety, and this is the threat to that, So it's like this constant reinvention of a need that actually doesn't really exist. And that stems from the monetization of everything. That's colonialism, appropriation, monetization, extraction, repeat, It's extremely destructive. And it's become a political weapon to do that because it shifts focus from what like you said, Yuval, the actual issue is, So you tell somebody who is poor, yeah, you're poor because there's immigrants coming here. Or you're poor because the state is costing so much money having refugees, for example, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's easier to understand when you say weaponization of needs.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Beautifully put. This mystification exists across so many elements, right? Like you think about Palestine right now, there is and always have been this mystification as if this is about religion or different ethnic groups. So, they always tell you, this is too complex, too complicated, When in reality, this is just like anything else. It's neoliberalism and capitalism at work, right? Colonialism, capitalism at work. There is resources and land, and that's it. It's not that complicated. You stop the occupation, you stop the colonialism, you stop the extraction, you stop the genocide, and there will be no more need for any of that. It's like this endless obstruction of what is real and grounded in ecological material reality into these kind of abstract ideas that have no connection to anything.
Well, it's like a religion. It's a religion of this free market thinking, of the idea that free market is some kind of natural phenomenon that will sort everything out, right? Technology, if we just let it run rampant, it's going to solve our problems. And I don't even believe they are the white supremacists even. I think it's just white supremacy is a is a tool for the mechanisms of capital.
Yeah.
And
Because this is also an abstraction, right? Like there is no such thing as race, right? It's a complete abstraction.
yeah. And you look at them, they have, it's very fluid when the racism sets in and when it doesn't, right? So you see with this Islam as well, why is Islam the main enemy of capitalism? What are the fundamentals that make it an enemy of capitalism? It's that it's not conducive to creating consumers.
Yep. Unlike Christianity, which is apparently very, very conducive with it.
I mean, there's sects of both religions. I feel like that are very,
Yeah.
It's the people using the tool of religion that make it what it is, right? So
The material conditions that create the relationship with religion, of course.
yeah, and their worldview that kind of creates how they function and use and see things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just thinking like how do you counteract this? And I was, I am sober. I'm a sober alcoholic. I got sober like in using the 12 steps with the program of AA. And I had a sponsor, and you work these like 12 steps, and part of it is like a searching and fearless moral inventory of all of your resentments and all of the people that you have problems with and all of your relationships. It's like this, you go through your entire life basically and kind of try to take an objective inventory of what you could have done better, what you did wrong, and what you find is that everything kind of stems from self-centered fear, that all of my actions and that kind of set a ball rolling to create resentments began with self-centered fear. And my sponsor, who's a friend of mine, she had me write out like, what are my basic needs? And so I was like, I need to have fulfilling relationships with other humans. I need to have shelter. I need to have food and water. I need the very basic needs. And she asked me, are those needs being met today? And yes, pretty much every day my basic needs are being met. And so and I guess I'm gonna be. I don't want to talk too long, but part of what has helped me is reminding myself that my needs are being met today, like being present in the moment and knowing that I have everything I need right now. I don't have to feel that feeling of scarcity. I have food. I have relationships and community. I have shelter, and I don't have to live in that self-centered fear every day.
Well, I would continue this conversation forever, and I'm happy that we're going to continue next week. But for now, nature calls, and I will need to go about my day. Thank you so much for joining, for your presence, for your continual support. For anybody who is watching this after the facts, please join us on Patreon and join these readings live so you can become part of the process of this emergence. Yeah, thank you all for being here. See you next week.